Authorities will carry out a fresh search for missing British girl Madeleine McCann in Portugal. She was 3 when she went missing from a holiday apartment back in 2007, so almost 20 years ago. German police will lead the search, focusing on an area between the apartment and the house where the prime suspect used to live. The operation will be the first in 2 years.
There's absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead.
But then you hear
let me finish, please. There's absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead, and there's absolutely no evidence that we were involved in her disappearance. Well, that is the conclusion.
Let me finish.
That is the conclusion of the process, and that's what we're here debating. The conclusions of the process versus the conclusions of the book. They are not the same. Why would we be shocked? We're not denying the existence. Why would we be shocked? We're not denying the existence of the dogs or anything else. It's evidence we're interested in. There is no evidence that Madeleine is dead.
You know, we know the truth. I know I'm innocent. Jerry knows he's innocent. We know each other are innocent. And that, to me, it was actually quite calming, because I thought, we're innocent, we're totally innocent. And we know that.
Did Kate McCann have more information than she disclosed? Was she concealing something sinister or shielding her husband? Her composure, her silence when questioned by the police, and the unavoidable cadaver dog alerts were some of these contributing factors. Fingers pointed, theories swirled. But then, what is just fear and what is fact? We investigate the case thoroughly. We'll solve the mystery that still plagues the world and find the evidence. Remain with us. You might be surprised by how disturbing the truth is. Around 10 o'clock, Kate McCann came back from dinner. As she brushed her teeth, she expected nothing unusual, just a check as usual. But when she walked into the Ocean Club, she stepped through the apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, which had a strange vibe. The children's bedroom door was open. The shutter was up, the window was wide open, and the night air pushed the curtains gently in waves. 2-year-old twins, Sean and Homily, slept undisturbed, but the bed by the window was empty. Madeleine was gone. Kate stood frozen for a moment, taking in the absence, the impossibility of it. Then the scream came, a raw, tearing sound that echoed across the resort. They've taken her. It should have been the beginning of a search. Instead, it was the beginning of a storm. Within hours, the tranquil coastal resort turned chaotic. Staff, tourists, and police were all searching and shouting. Kate clutched Madeleine's favorite toy, a pink stuffed cat named Cuddle Cat, as if it were a lifeline. She moved through the resort in a blur of panic, shouting Madeleine's name, her breath barely keeping pace with her thoughts. But even then, whispers had already begun. Not everyone believed her. Kate McCann was not what people expected. She didn't cry on camera in the manner that some expected a grieving mother to behave. She didn't collapse into incoherence. She stood calm and focused, still holding the stuffed toy with a measured tone, brushed hair, and controlled words. And that's when the suspicion began to bloom. They said her composure was unnatural, that the window she claimed was open showed no sign of forced entry, that the only fingerprints were hers. That Cuddle Cat, the very object she clung to in anguish, was one of the places a cadaver dog would later alert to the scent of death. The days passed, then weeks, then months. Still no trace of Madeleine. But something else surfaced. Doubt. The doubt was not about the crime, it was about the victim's parents. When British cadaver and blood-sniffing dogs were brought into the investigation, their reactions changed everything. They found evidence in the apartment, on Kate's clothing, on Cuddle Cat, and even in the boot of a rental car that the Max had rented weeks before Madeleine's disappearance. A new theory took hold, quiet at first, then louder than any search helicopter. This raised the possibility that Madeleine hadn't been taken at all. Maybe something had happened inside apartment 5A. And maybe Kate's parents both knew. The media, once protective, turned ravenous. Cameras zeroed in on Kate's face, searching not for tears but for cracks. Commentators speculated about her tone, her body language, and her choice of words. Why was she still wearing makeup? Why did she keep carrying Cuddle Cat even after the dogs had flagged it? Why did she refuse to answer 48 questions during police interrogation? And Kate, under legal counsel and siege and burdened by immeasurable grief, said only one thing. When asked if she had harmed her daughter, she answered simply, no. Yet, the theory grew that Madeleine died that night, perhaps by accident. Kate and Jerry, both doctors, panicked and covered it up. They staged a break-in, opened the window, and built a lie that every interview since was a performance, and every appearance in the media was a ploy. No evidence ever supported that theory. The blood traces did not prove anything. The DNA results are unreliable. Nobody was ever found, but the damage was done. Kate McCann had moved in the public's imagination from mother to suspect. But Kate wasn't the only one under pressure. The police also encountered criticism with accusations of bias, poor management, and narrow-mindedness. The initial hours had been chaotic. The border alerts were late. The crime scene was compromised. And as criticism mounted, attention shifted again. The McCanns were named arguidos, formal suspects. But without evidence to prosecute, the case stalled. The Portuguese police backed off. British investigators took over. The world moved on. Except Kate. She launched a fund, hired private detectives, and appealed on international television. She spoke to governments, investigators, and anyone who would listen. But nothing brought her daughter back. And still she was judged. Something is chilling about silence after noise. The media storms faded. The cameras moved on. But for Kate, the silence became unbearable. In that silence, something else began to grow. A new kind of narrative darker than the rest. This whisper of conspiracy involved things more powerful than a family, including networks, cover-ups, and secrets that extended beyond the walls of apartment 5A. And Kate, in this new story, was no longer the grieving mother. She was either an accomplice or a pawn. And just when the world thought they'd heard it all, a book emerged. The book presented a new theory, introduced a lead investigator, and made a bold accusation that would reignite public interest. The man who previously led the investigation into Madeleine McCann's disappearance authored this book. In its pages, he not only proposed a theory but also identified specific individuals. He directly implicated Kate and Jerry McCann. Its title is The Truth of the Lie, and with its release, everything changed. Up to that point, the case had stalled. Leads dried up. Interviews repeated. The story risked fading into the background. The tragedy remained unresolved. But Goncalo Amaral, the former Portuguese police inspector removed from the investigation, refused to let it go quietly. He believed the truth hadn't been buried with time. He believed it had been buried literally. In his version, Madeleine had not been abducted. She had died inside apartment 5A. And the people who knew the truth weren't strangers in the night, but her parents. The theory sparked renewed interest in the case, which had been stagnant for months. Focus. The book laid it out plainly. Emerald speculated that on the night of May 3, 2007, something went wrong. A tragic accident, a fall, an overdose. Whatever it was, he believed the McCanns, both trained doctors, didn't call for help. They acted to protect themselves. He painted a chilling picture. Madeleine is dead. A plan hastily formed. The window opened. The room is staged. The cry for help is scripted. And at the center of it all is Kate. The media seized on the story like sharks scenting blood. They replayed every interview and zoomed in on every photo. They questioned Kate's calm, her words, and her eyes. She doesn't cry. Some said she's too composed. It seemed as if motherhood required a performance to gain acceptance. Kate's silence during her interrogation. 48 unanswered questions were no longer just suspicious. It was damning. She'd held on to cuddle Cat, even after cadaver dogs signaled the scent of death on it. Was it grief or guilt? Was she clinging to her daughter's memory or hiding behind it? But Amaral's theory didn't rely on behavior alone. It had evidence, or so it seemed. In August 2007, British cadaver and blood detection dogs were brought in. The subsequent events shocked investigators and intensified the lingering suspicion. The dogs alerted in 5 places. Behind the living room sofa in the man's apartment, Cuddle Cat found evidence. Specifically inside a wardrobe, on Kate's clothes, and on the boot of a rental car that had been hired 25 days after Madeleine vanished. For many, that was it. Proof. How could a dog trained to detect human remains be alert inside a car the family had only rented after the disappearance, unless a body had been there? It was irrelevant that no DNA test ever confirmed Madeleine's presence, that multiple people had used the car, or that cadaver dogs, despite being trained, are not infallible. In the court of public opinion, the ruling was in. The McCanns were guilty. And Kate, calm, articulate, unreadable Kate, was the mastermind behind the deception. One newspaper dubbed her the Ice Mother. Others stopped even pretending to be objective. Online forums erupted. Reddit threads, Facebook groups, and video breakdowns all dissect Kate's posture, her phrasing, and her pauses. Every second of every interview was rewound and replayed, looking for signs. They scrutinized every blink, every smile, and every fleeting breath. Even silence became a weapon. But Amaril's book didn't just offer an alternate theory. It changed the entire power dynamic of the case. Kate and Jerry were no longer grieving parents, fighting to find their daughter. They were adversaries of law enforcement. They were suspects painted as such by one of their own. Kate wasn't just doubted. She was on trial, not in court, but everywhere else. The irony was staggering. The theory was just that there was no body, no video, no witness, and no time-stamped moment of truth. And yet it didn't matter. Amaril's words, presented with the authority of a former investigator, held more weight than evidence and more power than empathy. For Kate, it wasn't just a personal attack. It was a public execution. Still, some questioned the book's timing. Amaral had been removed from the case. His replacement had dismissed much of his theory. The DNA results were inconclusive. Despite the circumstantial nature of the so-called evidence, the damage was irreversible. The McCanns sued Amaral for defamation. The legal battle dragged on for years. It cost them dearly, not just financially but emotionally. Kate once said the book turned the tide against them, that it hurt the search for Madeleine more than anything else. Despite the circumstances, the public desired a villain, and Amaral had provided one. The press fueled the conflagration. Some headlines read like indictments. Others are more subtle, questioning Kate's psychology. Why didn't she show raw grief? Why wasn't she breaking down in public? However, no one paused to consider, what if she were merely trying to survive? What if composure wasn't coldness but courage? What if Cuddle Cat wasn't evidence but a lifeline? And what if the real question was never about guilt but about grief? Yet, as Kate clung to hope and the world clung to suspicion, something else was happening. Behind the scenes, the Madeleines were being rebuilt. Statements re-examined, witnesses requested. There were cracks in Amaral's theory, in the Madeleine, in the assumptions, and in the so-called evidence. But the public didn't see those cracks. They saw only a mother silent under interrogation, a stuffed toy flagged by cadaver dogs, a book claiming to tell the truth. In that image, the mother appears cold, composed, and unreadable. The story found its villain. And yet, one question still hung in the air. If Kate wasn't telling the truth, why would she keep asking the world to look for her daughter? Why launch a fund? Hire investigators, speak to the media, and fight in court? What mother hides a body, and then spends years asking for the world to find it? This incident raises the question of whether the body ever existed or if she genuinely believed her daughter was still alive. Kate McCann wasn't just under suspicion. She was standing at the edge of guilt in the eyes of millions. A stuffed toy, a hint of death, and a mother's face that didn't quite match the tragedy were all that was needed. But the case was never just about perception. It was about evidence. And if that evidence couldn't hold, if the science didn't match the story, then everything built on top of it might collapse. One disturbing reality haunted those analyzing the case. Cadaver dog alerts alone are not proof. Expectations skyrocketed when samples were sent for DNA analysis. If Madeleine's genetic, finding Madeleine's genetic profile in the apartment or car would transform everything. But the results came back complicated. Some samples were too small. Others were mixed with DNA from multiple sources. One fragment pulled from the boot of the rental car was flagged as a possible match to Madeleine, but it likely is not conclusive. And experts warned that contamination was not just likely, it was almost inevitable. Dozens of people had accessed the apartment, including family, friends, police, cleaners, and journalists. The car rented weeks later was used to transport everything from groceries to garbage. DNA in that setting is practically useless. Still, the theory refused to die because DNA wasn't holding it up. It was being held up by belief, by the idea that if a mother looked a certain way and a dog barked in the dark, then there must be something sinister underneath it all. However, few people explored the possibility of an additional layer to the dog's alerts. They weren't consistent. The cadaver dog had alerted in multiple locations, whereas the blood dog had only alerted in one specific location behind the living room sofa. No visible blood was ever recovered. No verified match to Madeleine was ever confirmed. Even in places where the cadaver dog had signaled, like Cuddle Cat, no traceable biological evidence was found. Just scent. And scent in forensic terms is smoke. But smoke without fire is suspicion without substance. Yet suspicion had already taken root. And Kate McCann had become its unwilling centerpiece. She wasn't weeping on camera. She wasn't falling apart. She was talking, organizing, and appealing to the world. She looked too in control. But what if control was the only thing holding her together? What if silence during interrogation wasn't evasion but exhaustion? What if clinging to a stuffed toy wasn't evidence but a mother's last fragile link to a daughter taken by something no one could see? As doubts grew around the dog evidence, the story began to unravel. This included not only the theory but also the fundamental structure supporting it. The belief that behavior could serve as proof, that facial expressions could replace facts, and that perception could take precedence over forensics. The cadaver dogs had shifted the narrative. Now, forensic science was shifting again. However, the shift was not solely due to science. It was logic. Think about it. If Madeleine had died that night and her parents had hidden her body, where would it have been hidden? How was it moved? In a busy resort, in the space of an hour, with 2 toddlers asleep in the next room, with friends nearby, staff walking past, neighbors listening, and cameras rolling, how does a grieving couple pull off a cover-up under full public view, under pressure, and in panic? And if they had moved the body weeks later, as some claimed, how did they store it? Where, without a trace. Without error, no eyewitness, no video, no witness confession, no smell noticed, no trace found, only a scent and a theory. By 2008, Portuguese authorities had to make a decision. Despite all the theories, despite the suspicion, despite the noise, there was no evidence strong enough to prosecute. Kate and Jerry McCann were cleared as official suspects. And just like that, the case returned to limbo. The case remained unresolved and uncharged, with only a single lingering truth. A child was missing. Despite the McCann's exoneration, the damage had already occurred. Public trust didn't fade overnight. The theory lingered. Online speculation exploded. Kate's face, frozen in carefully chosen frames, was shared, debated, and dissected. The truth by then had become secondary. The story had taken over. By now, the story had shifted again. The world was beginning to look past the apartment, past the parents, and even past the lingering scent in the boot of a car. Attention had turned toward a new figure, someone who fit the classic mold of a monster, a convicted sex offender, a drifter, a man with a violent past and a disturbing pattern. But while this new suspect hovered in headlines, something else kept dragging the public back to Kate. Because while the facts were evolving, the image of the unmotherly mother refused to fade. You see, in most missing child cases, parents are either ruled out quickly or charged swiftly. But Kate McCann existed in a strange middle space, legally cleared but socially condemned. She didn't cry on cue, nor did she collapse in interviews. She didn't behave like the ideal broken woman. And in the warped lens of media obsession, that wasn't just strange, it was suspicious. As Christian Brückner's name entered the investigation, something unexpected happened. It didn't clear Kate in the eyes of the public. This development further complicated her situation, as the theories surrounding the case became darker. It wasn't just that she did it. Was she part of something bigger? This included a network, a conspiracy, and a cover-up that stretched beyond a resort in Portugal and into the corridors of power. Suddenly, the whispers weren't just about a grieving mother but about a mother who might have been complicit. Online, the case mutated. On forums, people drew Madeleine's, maps, government links, and phone records. Social media transformed into a frenzied realm of conjecture. Reddit threads read like detective dossiers. YouTube channels emerged dedicated solely to Kate's expressions, her voice, and her outfits. They weren't searching for Madeleine anymore. They were hunting for a story that fit their beliefs. And Kate was the perfect villain. Why? Because she didn't scream enough. Because she wore eyeliner in a TV interview. Because she clutched Cuddle Cat when the cadaver dog had already alerted to it. She didn't portray herself as a distraught mother. But that's the trick of public perception. British tabloids were ruthless, calling her composed, robotic, and calculating. A few days later, the running features focused on her heartbreak and resilience. Kate was whiplash between saint and suspect. Neither label fits, both of them in prison. And all the while, the investigation kept circling the same frustrating truth. There was no conclusive evidence. Not in the apartment, not in the car, not in the hands of the police. Nothing. Just theories, just noise. Kate refused to fade. She gave interviews and appealed to governments. She and Jerry poured energy into Madeleine's fund, which helped hire private investigators and launch awareness campaigns. Critics called it a media stunt, but Kate referred to it as survival, explaining that doing nothing and sitting in silence would have killed her faster than the grief ever could. Still, the judgment never eased. Even years later, people were more obsessed with her facial expressions than the evolving suspect. What if the world didn't want to find out what happened to Madeleine? What if they wanted something simpler? Could the world have preferred a villain, a sanitized conclusion, or an individual to blame? If Kate didn't conform to the ideal of a grieving mother, it could reveal more about the mold than the mother herself. There's a reason Kate McCann became the focal point of suspicion. It wasn't just because of the cadaver dog alerts. It wasn't just the book written by the former investigator. And it wasn't even because of anything she said. It was because of how she said it. From the moment she appeared on screen, calm and collected, the narrative began to twist. While Jerry spoke firmly and logically, Kate stood beside him, reserved, expression controlled, holding Cuddle Cat like it might vanish too. And for many, that was all it took. She didn't look like a grieving mother. She didn't cry like a mother who'd lost a child. And in the warped lens of public expectation, that was enough to put her on trial. But who decides what grief looks like? Why do we expect mothers to collapse under the weight of loss, sobbing uncontrollably, screaming for justice in front of flashing cameras? Why do we trust tears over silence, chaos over control? It wasn't forensic evidence that painted Kate as a suspect. It was the body language, facial expressions, and the way she held her grief, not the volume that mattered. Psychologists have since explained this in chilling clarity. Grief doesn't come in a script. Some scream, others freeze, some lash out, and others shut down completely. And Kate, she functioned because she had to. For her twins, for the cameras, for the millions watching her every blink and breath. But the world wasn't interested in understanding. It was interested in judging. Kate's decision to remain composed became evidence of its kind. Her refusal to answer 48 police questions, legal advice, standard and high-stakes investigations was seen not as protection, but as deflection. Her insistence on holding Cuddle Cat after the dog alerts twisted into guilt instead of seeing it for what it likely was. Grief is anchored to something tangible. When the public looked at her, they didn't see a broken mother. They saw a woman behaving in a way they did not want. When women fail to conform to expectations, the world becomes suspicious. It happened before. Susan Smith shed tears on national television before the revelation of her son's drowning. Her tears gave her time and they gave her public compassion. It happened again with Casey Anthony, whose erratic behavior didn't stop her from being acquitted despite glaring inconsistencies in a damning trial. Kate McCann, by contrast, showed restraint, which made people uncomfortable. But discomfort is not proof and silence is not guilt. Yet the situation became a trap, not for Kate but for all of us. The trap that says if you don't grieve the way we expect, then you must be lying. Kate was placed in an emotional double bind. If she sobbed, she'd be manipulative. If she stayed calm, she came across as cold. If she spoke too eloquently, she was rehearsed. If she trembled, she was unstable. There was no way to win. The media only made it worse. Tabloids turned her appearance into daily headlines. Kate's face, does it show guilt? Talk shows debated her tone. Online forums analyzed her body language with amateur accuracy and malicious confidence. On YouTube, slowed footage of her interviews appeared under titles like Kate McCann, Guilty or Just Cold? When she makes a mistake, pay attention to her eyes. Every movement became a clue. Every pause an accusation. There was no need for proof, only a sense of perception. And here's the darkest truth. The obsession with Kate's behavior overshadowed the reason she was on TV in the first place. A child was gone. A 3-year-old girl vanished from her bed. Somehow, the focus shifted from the child's disappearance to the appearance of her mother as she asked for help. The incident wasn't just a narrative trap. It was a distraction, one that the real perpetrator, whoever they may be, never had to worry about. While the world dissected Kate, the real perpetrator slipped further into the shadows. When society decides that emotions are evidence and that women must suffer publicly to be believed, we risk ignoring the truth that's right in front of us, we risk turning trauma into theater, and we risk letting the guilty walk free. At the same time, we punish the grievers for not grieving loudly enough. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann had stopped being a tragedy and turned into a battleground. The conflict extends not only between investigators and suspects but also across nations and between the media and the truth. And at the center of it all, Kate McCann is in Portugal. The local police had begun to grow frustrated. The pressure, the press, the international attention. Every headline was a hammer against the investigation. The leads had dried up. The window theory had holes. The evidence was shaky at best, but one thing was crystal clear to them. Kate's story didn't sit right. The cadaver dogs had signaled. The window showed no forced entry. Kate had refused to answer dozens of questions. For detectives in the Policia judiciary, it was simple. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was something darker. So they made a decision. The authorities named Kate and Jerry Arguidos as official suspects. Across the ocean in Britain, the reaction was immediate and divided. To some, it was a betrayal. To others, it confirmed what they suspected all along. Kate, once the face of maternal heartbreak, was now being called calculating, stone-faced, and even criminal. But the evidence hadn't changed. There was no body, no confession, no eyewitness, no murder weapon, no motive, just silence and scent. The pressure from both governments was enormous. Portuguese investigators felt mocked by the British press. British politicians privately questioned the competence of the local response, while the McCanns found themselves caught between two systems, two cultures, and two narratives. Kate didn't just lose her daughter. She was no longer considered innocent. Every move they made, every public statement, and every TV appearance was dissected. Why are they doing interviews if they're innocent? Why aren't they doing more if they're guilty? Why is Kate wearing makeup? No trace of Madeleine. That was the one fact that refused to change. No breakthrough, no ransom note, no sightings that held up, just nothing. Every door that swung open led to another dead end. Privately, the McCann's world was collapsing. Their names were on front pages across the globe. Their friends, the top 7, were being questioned, doubted, and even accused. Their movements, their decisions, and even their grief were weaponized. They weren't just being investigated. They were being dismantled, and then there was silence from the Portuguese side. But in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, what stunned investigators wasn't the evidence they found, it was what they didn't. Some say it proves she staged the scene. Others argue it's exactly what you'd expect. A moth was trying desperately to see if her daughter had been taken through the window, and so the confusion deepens. Every absence becomes a clue. Every clue is a contradiction. Then came the DNA test. In a case already thick with speculation, this was supposed to be the moment of clarity. Forensic samples from the apartment, the car, and the man's belongings were sent to a UK lab. The results were hyped. Breakthrough imminent, the headlines teased. But when the results came back, they were useless. Partial matches, inconclusive samples, mixed profiles, nothing definitive, nothing that could be used in court, nothing that answered the one question the world kept asking. Where is Madeleine? For those who believed in the parents' guilt, it didn't matter. They pointed to the car rented weeks later, where the cadaver dogs had alerted. They said, why would the dogs react unless something was there? But even that theory unraveled under scrutiny. Multiple people had used the car for various purposes, including groceries, garbage, and luggage. The DNA found was degraded, too small to make a reliable match, and too ambiguous to mean anything in isolation. The prosecution quietly stepped back. The headlines, however, never did. And so, the silence retook hold. No evidence meant no charges, but no evidence also meant no answers. The case hung in limbo, a mystery suspended in smoke. It became a ghost story. People began to search for meaning in absence, in shadows, in glances, in theories. And the longer it went on, the louder it became. A stranger had taken Malenieved. A stranger had taken Madeleine. Others insisted the parents were hiding something. Still more claimed a larger conspiracy involved a cover-up that extended far beyond Portugal. But through it all, one fact stood unshakable. There was no physical trace of the crime itself. No fingerprints, no DNA, no body, nothing. For seasoned investigators, such an event was a red flag. Real crimes leave objective evidence. So what kind of crime doesn't? If Madeleine were kidnapped, how did someone navigate in and out without leaving a single mark? If she died in the apartment, how was her body moved, hidden, and disposed of with surgical precision by two parents under intense public scrutiny? Every theory demanded an almost impossible level of control. It was either a flawless abduction or a meticulous cover-up. Either way, it challenged the limits of logic. And yet, logic has its limits too. Crimes, particularly those involving children, often defy rational understanding. Occasionally, the unthinkable occurs, and other times it leaves no trace. That's the paradox of the Madeleine McCann case. The harder you seek unsuccessful evidence, the more it disappears. Remember that Christian Brückner was just another face lost in the crowd. He was a man drifting in and out of the Algarve. He was a ghost in the background of a tragedy that no one could explain. But while the world dissected Kate McCann's face on television, while tabloids tore apart every word, every pause, every movement of the parents, he was there lurking, watching, waiting. And when investigators finally turned toward him, it was almost too late. Brückner wasn't a stranger to the area. In 2007, when Madeleine vanished, he was living just minutes from the Ocean Club Resort, not in a house, but in a camper van parked where no one paid attention. He wasn't just passing through. He knew the streets, the shortcuts, and the back alleys. He even received a phone call the night Madeleine disappeared, just an hour before Kate raised the alarm. That call was placed near the resort. And then the very next day, Brückner re-registered his car under someone else's name. Some called it a coincidence. But after 13 years of dead ends, investigators saw something else. A pattern. Brückner's past was darker than most ever imagined. Brückner had a string of convictions for child abuse, sexual assault, and burglary. He had broken into homes. He had stalked families. And he had a specific disturbing history targeting holiday resorts, places just like Prius and apartments just like 5A. He had lived in both Portugal and Germany, crossing borders whenever things got uncomfortable. By the time he was on police radar again, he was already locked away for a different crime. But something didn't sit right. In prison, he bragged, not directly, not in confessions, but in stories told to other inmates. He spoke of girls who didn't cry, of windows left open, of how simple it was to slip in and out without a sound. The stories matched details only someone close to the case would know. But for investigators, suspicion wasn't enough. They needed more. They required proof, connections, and tangible evidence to establish Brückner not only in the region but also within the narrative itself. They scoured his records, his devices, his old camper van, hard drives, deleted emails, online forums, and conversations. The more they uncovered, the more the news seemed to tighten. On one device, investigators found images, messages, and search histories too horrific to describe. The material revealed a man engrossed in dominance, concealment, and child-rearing. He wasn't just capable of abduction. He had fantasized about it repeatedly. But here's the cruel twist. As damning as it looked, there was still no proof that tied him directly to Madeleine. No fingerprints in the apartment. There was no DNA found on her belongings. No surveillance footage shows him with the child. He remained on the periphery of the case. He was close enough to feel the case, but he was never entirely involved in it. Even with police convinced of his guilt, they couldn't bring charges. The evidence once again was all around, but never in the one place that mattered. Still, the theory held weight. Unlike the parents, Brückner had a motive. He had a past. He had the timing. And most damning of all, he had vanished from the investigator's sight for just long enough to avoid raising the earliest suspicions. He had done what no one else could, become invisible. But time was running out. Brückner's prison sentence was coming to an end. If prosecutors didn't act, he would walk free and possibly vanish again. Behind the scenes, German authorities scrambled to keep him held, digging for just one mistake, one trace, one forgotten file that might unlock the truth. In Portugal, the case had been reopened. In Britain, Scotland Yard re-engaged, but in every room, one question echoed louder than all the others. What if this was the man? What if the Max had been telling the truth all along? What if, while the world turned on a grieving mother, the real suspect had been camping a few streets away, watching everything unravel? This moment wasn't just a turning point in the case. The event was a reckoning, as Brückner's guilt would mean that everything the world had believed for over a decade would collapse. The media circus, the emotional guilt, and the skepticism directed towards Kate McCann's quiet, her poise, and her belief in her daughter's survival were all present. It would all become noise. Just noise. But here's the haunting part. Even with a suspect, even with a pattern, even with an entire investigative team convinced of his guilt, Madeleine is still missing. And Brückner still hasn't been charged because this situation isn't a movie. It's not a courtroom drama. There is no dramatic twist, no full confession, and no smoking gun. There's only time and silence. And the growing dread that maybe, just maybe, the person responsible has already faded back into the dark. The Madeleine McCann case has become more than a mystery. It's a mirror reflecting everything we fear about justice, grief, truth, and ourselves. From the first frantic hours to the global media storm, from cadaver dogs and shifting theories to a new suspect who may never face trial, we've watched this story turn from tragedy to obsession. Throughout this entire ordeal, one truth has remained constant. A 3-year-old girl was taken from her bed, and we still don't know what happened to her. The investigation remains open. Portugal, the UK, and Germany all still have active files. Leads continue to be followed. Tips are still being checked. Forensic teams have returned to old locations. Reservoirs have been searched. Vans have been stripped down. Witnesses re-entered. Authorities say they are closer than ever to the truth. However, they lack a final piece, a confession, a body, or a crucial connection. The case is locked in limbo. For Kate and Jerry McCann, that limbo is a prison. Every year on Madeleine's birthday, they light a candle. Every year they update the age-progressed images. And every year they say the same thing. They haven't given up. They don't shy away from confronting the worst, but their insatiable curiosity keeps them searching. Christian Brückner remains the official suspect. He's been named, investigated, and accused, but never charged with Madeleine's disappearance. He may walk free in a matter of months, face trial, or vanish again. And even if he did it, he may never say the words that bring this case to an end. But maybe that's what this story was always about. It's not just about a missing child, but also about how we respond to situations that defy explanation. The story revolves around a grieving mother who failed to express her grief appropriately. The public was more interested in finding answers than in discovering the truth. A suspect hiding in plain sight for years. At the heart of it all stands a single individual, too youthful to express their thoughts, too diminutive to engage in conflict, and too significant to overlook. So what happens now? The files remain open. The parents remain hopeful. The world remains divided. And we, those who followed the story, search the headlines, and the questions keep us right here at the edge of truth. We may never know exactly what happened in apartment 5A that night, but someone does. And if they're still out there watching, reading, and listening, there's still time to speak. Justice endures just as memory does. If you followed this journey and want to help keep Madeleine's story alive, take a second right now, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives like this. Your support helps us bring stories like this to more people with care, clarity, and the respect they deserve. This was the story of Madeleine McCann. It serves not only as a mystery but also as a reminder that truth isn't always loud. Occasionally, it disappears in the dark, and we owe it to her to keep looking.